This is James Sandy. Today is July 12th, 2024, and I'm interviewing Lieutenant General Paul Mikolashek. This interview is taking place on Zoom and is sponsored by the UTA Department of History and Geography as part of the Texas Veterans Project. Thank you for agreeing to participate, Paul. I really appreciate you adding your story to our collection. So to get started, can you tell me where you were from originally? What can you tell me about growing up?
I'm from Akron, Ohio. My mom was a school teacher. My dad worked in B.F. Goodrich, a rubber factory. He built tires and parts to airplanes and things. Um, I had a brother 2 years younger, and we grew up together in Akron, kind of a blue collar work environment. Um, and yeah, so that's how we grew up.
What year were you born?
1947.
1947. So pretty all-American childhood.
Yeah, for the most part of that era, I think, kind of built around the neighborhood and school and things like that is what we did there. Uh, you know, Nothing, there wasn't anything we lacked for that I knew about. So pretty normal, I think.
Okay. Um, and your family history, how long do you know your family in the area? Where's kind of they're originally from?
Oh, yeah, I know quite a bit about them. My dad's side, they came to the United States in the 1880s. My great grandfather and grandfather were both millwrights. My grandfather they came there, I think, to work for the Quaker Oats Company. That's where the headquarters was. And my grandfather became the chief millwright of Quaker Oats in the 1920s. I still have his tools that he used, mostly handmade, huge things. Yeah, so he was a millwright. On my mom's side, they came from Slovakia, Austria-Hungary, and the about the same time, maybe the 1890s, but they went to South Dakota. My grandfather was a shoemaker, a leather person, and that's what he did in the old country before he came. And he made saddles, horse bridles. They used to make me a pair of cowboy boots every year when I was little. And we spent our summers out in South Dakota. So I got to know that side of the family pretty well. Still, and great touch, our cousins and everything. I'm still in touch with them and go out there occasionally. So yeah, so that was unlike the other kids in the neighborhood who didn't have the South Dakota experience for a
Yeah,
few weeks in the
yeah,
summer.
yeah. What were those summers like? What do you remember about those?
Well, yeah, I remember them very vividly. One of the things I am blessed or cursed with is a memory that I never forget anything for the most part, except people's names when I see their faces. But um, yeah, it was, my grandfather, they lived on a very small farm in terms of the size of the farms there in South Dakota, which were huge. Now, I technically think he was not my uncle, maybe my grandmother's cousin's husband, but we used to call him Uncle Carl. He had a big farm, raised cattle, pigs, chickens, things like that. My grandmother, basically, they had chickens that uh, we used, and then corn and alfalfa. That's what grew around the farm. But my grandfather went to work every day. He'd walk not quite a mile down to the center of town and work in his shoe shop, leather store. Uh, and a pretty hardcore kind of guy, as was my grandfather in Ohio. My dad's dad was. These guys were tough, hardworking people there. There's a story in the paper. My grandfather, I think it was 1913. he fell from the top of one of the mills there, something like 13 stories down, hit the ground or hit, I don't know, it might have been just a pile of oats that he hit. I don't know. Um, but he got up, the doctor checked him out, and he went back to work. And he was a character too. He would go to wrestling matches in the armory on Saturday nights. And I went with him. Actually, I went with my dad. My brother and I went with my dad. We wouldn't sit with my grandpa because he sat right next to the ring. And then he would shout at wrestlers that he didn't like. There's a story in the paper there that says that if he didn't like him, he'd burn him with his cigar. And he was that kind of guy.
Yeah,
Uh,
sounds like quite the character.
yeah, tough old dude.
Yeah. So you guys would go spend the summer or a couple weeks in the summer with them?
The guy in South Dakota, we did. Yeah,
Yeah.
my
Oh, okay.
mom's dad. He was the shoemaker.
Gotcha. Okay. Um, so you said you have one brother. Were you guys close growing up?
Oh yeah, yeah. Grew up in the same room until I went in the army.
Gotcha. Okay.
There all the time. So there's ups and downs. We fought a lot with each other. Some of it in good jest. Other times, I was the older. I'd tease him, and he wouldn't like it, and he'd fight back, and I'd get in trouble, and that was kind of how it was. But
Yeah.
no, we did a lot together. We kind of had the same pool of friends for the most part growing up of kids his age, kids my age, people in between. It was that kind of environment there.
Okay. So you were born, raised, stayed in Akron essentially your whole childhood?
Yeah, absolutely. Yep.
Okay. And is that where you went to high school?
Yep.
Yeah.
Yep. I went to a all-male Catholic high school, Archbishop Hogan, run by the Brothers of Holy Cross.
Nice.
Um,
Well,
and
yeah,
it
what
was
was that
good.
experience like?
Well, like anything, there were ups and downs. I was the youngest kid in the class. Um, I was one of the smallest, and I played football in grade school, the version of junior high. But when I got there, I didn't even think about going out. I was just too small for all those bigger kids. So being small was kind of a handicap in an all-male school like that. But there were a couple other kids, kind of in the same boat I was. So we made it through okay. I was not a great student, much to my mother's chagrin, who was a teacher, and probably I say that she was my first and best teacher. Um, and she had high standards and expected me to meet them. And I felt her fury if I didn't, which was pretty consistent during high school there. But I learned an awful lot by that kind of discipline that my mom imposed on me there. And it took me a while in high school to figure things out, but it worked out okay. The teachers were all amazing. Uh, uh, Learned a lot, developed my two kind of the most important interests there. One was for science, the other for history, and based on the teachers that I had there. So, uh, yeah, that was it. Wasn't the most delightful experience, but it was a good one.
Gotcha. You said your mom was kind of the disciplinarian kind of academic rigor person. Was your dad strict in that same sense, or
He was one of these people that you didn't want to test him. There was no question there, but he was a big man, unlike me. And my brother and I were small through high school. I thought, it's kind of a pattern in our family, as it turns out. My grandson the same way, and my brother's son. Um, it took a while. My dad said my mom had a growth spurt. I remember her telling me I outgrew two coats in college. And so it was not unusual, but my dad was a big man, over 6 feet, weighed well over 200 pounds, probably at that time. Worked with his hands were huge.
Yeah.
And they talk about George Washington could crack a walnut with his fingers. My dad would do that without thinking.
Wow.
The few times um, that we were in trouble, you didn't want to do that ever again. But on the other hand, um, he was the most caring and loving um, and funny guy. He had a interesting sense of humor. He, just loved to laugh at things.
Yeah.
And he looked out for me and my brother all the time. He was there. I remember clearly one episode, a kid down the street, and we were friends and we would fight and all that stuff. Of course, he was older and also bigger, and he would pick on me from time to time and everything. And I remember one time, I can't remember what it was. He took something of mine and I was trying to get it back. And so I went after him. He started pushing me. My dad was across the street and he said, Paul, don't you stop. You wade into him. Don't let him get away with that. And I never forgot that.
Yeah, kind
My
of
dad's way of looking at
cemented.
something.
Yes,
Yeah.
cemented memory, huh? Yeah.
Yeah.
So private school, is that kind of just a family tradition? Was that
No, it was, but I think my mom wanted us to go to a Catholic school, and we went to Catholic grade school.
Hmm,
And so we went to a Catholic high school.
okay. So no sports in high school. What kind of activities did you
Yeah,
participate in
well,
high school?
let's see. Not, again, it was hard, and I made some mistakes there. I went out for the swimming team. My dad had taught my brother and I both to swim, and he was an excellent swimmer. My dad was. He could go without making a wake. His crawl was just smooth, and taught us to dive and all that stuff. And so I went out for the swim team, and the way they did it, they said, "How many strokes can you do?" And I went out for every one. I could do the crawl, the backstroke, butterfly, breaststroke, all that stuff. And then the brother, at the end of the tryouts, he picked me, but it was hard getting. We lived far away from school. We had to go to the university for where the swimming pool was, so it was just difficult. And I thought that it was just going to be too much of a burden.
Hmm,
Because my mom worked, my dad worked. My dad started working odd night shifts so my mom could use the car, and when she changed schools. So part of me was, I couldn't make it all the time, so I didn't follow up on the swimming thing. I was in the band. I played the trumpet before I went to high school, so I got put in the band. But I would have football would have been the only sport I was interested in.
hmm.
But again, I have been pummeled to death, uh, just there. So
Okay.
I don't regret it, though. I kind of wish there was something I could have. Probably the swimming team. I really wish I would have somehow made it. And they would have figured it out. My mom and dad would have figured it out, but I just didn't want to force them to do that.
Sure. In high school, did you have any interest in the military, ROTC,
Oh
anything
yeah.
like that?
Well, I didn't know anything about ROTC. I knew what it was. There was a guy in our neighborhood that I'd see him wearing his uniform, but I was always interested in the military. I can't remember when I wasn't there. My dad was in the Army in World War II. Um, I had two uncles in World One there, one in the Marines, one in the Army. Um, and I think just growing up in the 50s, and every kid's parent was a World War II veteran. Well, all my uncles except one, and he was a Treasury agent during the war. My dad's brothers, my other uncle was a major in the Army. But like I said, every kid in the neighborhood, dad was in something, the Navy, Air Force, Marines. whatever. So that was just part of the deal, and I was just always interested in that. And yeah, so I don't can't think of a time when I wasn't thinking about going in, and that changed. I was going to be in the Air Force at one time. I thought about seriously about going into the Navy. I had a cousin who went through Navy ROTC, and he's just a few years older than me, probably 4 or 5 years older than me. And he explained to me what he did and how he got commissioned and what he sent a couple letters when he was floating around out in a destroyer and things like that. So uh, yeah, I thought maybe I would go in the Navy and I wanted to go in the Marines for a while. And that was where I really thought I was going to go when I went to college. Um, there, Akron was a land grant college. So in that era, the land grant colleges, all male students had to go to ROTC for 2 years.
Oh,
And it was Army and Air Force. And and you had to register. Well, by the time my day came up for registration, the Air Force had been filled. The only thing left was Army, so I took Army ROTC. Um, which certainly turned out well, but I didn't have an intention of staying in the Army. And I was a freshman, a buddy of mine and I were going through the student center, and there's this Marine sergeant there, and uh, so we both stopped, and this guy John Waymeyer, I mean, we're friends, close friends to this day. Talked to him this morning. Um, and so we talked to this guy about this Marine program. It was called PLC. You may have heard of it, Platoon Leaders Class or something like that. It was called, and explained to us, hey, you just do this thing in the summer for 6 weeks twice, and when you graduate, you get commissioned. And I said, do you have an aviation program? He said, well, you can compete for it. And I said, well, that's what I'm going to do. So we both signed up.
wow.
There were actually three of us that signed up for this thing. Only two of us went into the actual program. So yeah, I was going to be a Marine. I was all set for that.
You said
Uh,
this was your freshman year at Akron?
Freshman year. Mhm.
Freshman year. Okay.
Yeah, probably. Uh, that, yeah, maybe like in the winter
Yeah.
sometime when this happened. Because I remember going to get it was a cold day when we went to get our physicals and get
Mhm.
interviewed and stuff like that there. But yeah, so that's how that went. But I was active in ROTC. I joined Pershing Rifles. They put on a big recruiting thing.
Mhm.
Um, I thought it would be cool, and so I did. That turned out to be a lot of fun. Um, and I had something there at the school. I didn't think that at the time. In retrospect, it was important uh, to help that transition from high school to college. And
Yeah.
uh,
So I do want to go back really quick. So you said your dad was in the Army during World War II?
Mhm.
Yeah. What did he do?
He was well. He was it's to start. He was an infantryman. He had enlisted in the Ohio National Guard in early 1941,
Hmm.
so before the war started. Um, and we went through all the National Guard training and everything. And then, of course, the war started. He was already in the 37th Infantry Division, Ohio National Guard. They got activated and mobilized, and he went through some of the prep training, of course, at Indiantown Gap, and then some of these big exercises. I think they were part of the Louisiana maneuvers or something
Hmm.
similar. He was down in Mississippi for part of that time. Um, and then they deployed. Um, their mission was to defend kind of the outer ring of small islands to uh, protect Australia that
Hmm.
from Japanese and to limit their sea lines of communication. Now I know this now.
Hmm.
So they went his division or part of it. His regiment certainly were in the Fijis island for some period of time. Hit one regiment or a battalion anyway, ended up in Guadalcanal, after the Marines cleared it out to stabilize it. The Army went in and
Hmm.
took it over. It was part of the 37th Infantry Division. Um, Somewhere, and I don't know exactly when and where, he got transferred to a engineer special brigade. They created these amphibious engineer brigades. He got transferred to one of them, and he was in the 553rd Shore and Boat Regiment.
Hmm.
And their job was to move equipment from the transport ships to the shore, organize it, and get it ready to ship forward. And he was in one of the shore companies, as they were called. But they had these ducks. You may have
Hmm.
heard of these
Yeah.
ducks. They operated these ducks and other smaller landing craft and bigger ships to move around. So he was involved in a number of those campaigns in New Guinea, Hollandia, Finschhaven, some of those, and then they went into the Philippines and Lingayen Gulf, and so he was up there, um, and then when the war ended, the unit did not go home, but he got to go home. Because he had so many points, because he had deployed earlier than that unit that he was with and had been in the guard before. So his whatever how they calculated the point system as they had.
Hmm.
Uh, but he was overseas for essentially 3 years um, at that point in time when the bomb was dropped. But the unit then went to Japan to facilitate the occupation to do it's an amphibious operation essentially bringing all the troops in not under fire. But yeah, so that's when he got out in September, October 45.
Wow. Was that something he talked about a lot, or was it kind of, I did my part, I'm going to move on with my
Well, and
life?
there's a couple. He did mention things occasionally there, and sometimes talking to other um, people. And then, of course, there's always the joke kind of part of being in the army and those kinds of things. But there were a couple times. I remember one time in particular. My mom had some kind of teachers meeting or something like that, and it was in the evening. Um, so I went with him to pick her up. I don't know. He might have picked me up from school, and then we were going to wait for her, and it went on and on and on. It's seemingly now this is from, and I'm guessing I might have been in eighth grade, freshman in high school when this was going on. And so started asking him questions about kind of what he did. And he basically told me his whole um, time, what he did. He was here, he was there, he moved here. We were going to go, they were here, they were sent up to New York, they were going to go to Europe, the 37th Division was. They got shifted at the last minute, took a train all the way across country, went to Fort Ord and trained, and then they went out to the Fijis and did this and that, and I asked him what he was doing when the war ended, and that's how he told me about the points and everything. And not a lot of detail on the everyday kind of stuff, but he had a scrap. Well, I have it now, a scrapbook of pictures
Oh,
that he had of him doing all sorts of various things. Some of them on the ships, some of it ashore. He's with a, you know, standing in front of a P-40 airplane.
hmm.
I guess they were building a runway or something. But so that was there, and occasionally we'd ask him about some of those things there.
Hmm.
Uh, so
So with him having served and your interest in serving, was that something you guys ever talked about as you're going into high school, approaching college, that, you want to serve? What was y'all's kind of relationship around that idea?
Um, I don't know that there was one. I mean, he knew that I was interested in going into the military,
Mm-hmm.
is all. He thought it was okay. And then what happened? See, this whole Marine thing.
Yeah, back
Uh,
to this.
so I did. I went to the first session there at Quantico and all that stuff. And because I was active, I think in the Pershing Rifles and in ROTC, and I actually was working in the ROTC supply room. There, me and two of my buddies worked there. I was the armorer. We had, I don't know, 200 M1 rifles. They hired me to maintain them, and that was, like a student job there that I did that. And then when the cadets came, we passed out uniforms and did all that stuff. So I worked in the Army supply room. So I was noticed by the PMS, and I had by that time I had good grades and was active in PRs. And he talked to me about this colonel, talked to me about uh, being in the Marines, and he said, um, if you resign from the Marines, I'll give you an ROTC scholarship. And so I figured that's a no-brainer.
That's a
And
pretty good deal. Yeah.
yeah, so that's what I did. And my dad visibly proud
Yeah.
when I got that scholarship, and no doubt happy because he was not going to pay any more for my college,
Yeah, for sure.
to
Um,
include books and stuff like that, plus a stipend. So yeah.
um, okay. So, just real quick, just to kind of like get the timeline right. What year do you get to Akron? What year do you start college?
Oh, 65.
65. And so ROTC, interested, you're going to do this. What is your academic major?
I started as a chemistry major.
Okay.
Because I like the science part. I thought there would, and matter of fact, this guy John Waymeyer and I, we were just talking the other day about this, um, and uh, and I told him, and it kind of dawned on me, based on my wife's brother. But everybody had to be in ROTC, and he decided to go into the advanced course too. He got to summer camp, and in spite of all the physicals and everything else, in the physical for the advanced camp at Indiantown Gap, they identified him as having some kind of back problem, and you're done. You got to go home. You can't serve. So Bill, he went home, so on and so forth. Now the rest of the story is after a while, his doctors and so forth said there's nothing wrong with your back. So to this day, we don't know why he got booted out. But I was talking to John, and I said, um, if that would have happened to me, I wouldn't know what I was going to do. I had no backup plan. I had switched from chemistry to history. Um, and because I'd gone in the army, and chemistry was hard. Um, for me. And anyway, the math part was getting more and more challenging. The chemistry I had kind of figured out, but it was going to get worse. Organic chemistry was coming up. That would have been the next thing. And I was on the ARM scholarship then, and I, taken time for ROTC and things like that. And I said, this is going to be too hard. And I'm going in the army, so I switched to history. And then my cum went up from like 2.9 to 3.75, and in one semester. So so that part was okay. But um I had no plans to do anything else. So it worked out okay in that regard. So that's why I switched to being a history major, which has actually, for kind of a useless major, served me well.
Well, I'm a proponent of the history degree, but
Yeah, yeah, and I am too, and I talk to people about it
yeah,
all the time. And I tell them that I it helped me in the Army, particularly in the overseas assignments, because if I'm going somewhere, whether it was Germany, Vietnam, Japan, Middle East, the first thing you do is dive into the history of where you're going, and it helps you relate to them. Particularly in Japan, I knew more about their history than the officers that I was dealing with,
Mm-hmm.
partly because they have that one kind of dark area there
Mm-hmm.
called World War II, but it's not a thing they do. Um, so their more ancient history, they of course do, but so it gives you some context there. And all my NATO counterparts in there, it gave you something to talk about
Mm-hmm.
when you're there, and you run into these people that they too are historians, maybe closet historians, but I was an aide over there in NATO headquarters to my boss, who was the mill rep at the time. So we had this little aide mafia that we had. And then you learn the Italian aide. The guy was fascinated, of course, with Italian history, and he's reading all these books and everything. So, it gives you a little bit of a bond. So I think was very helpful. And um, the true value is it helps you put things in perspective, if you understand that. And that's what I
Yeah.
tell. I work at the Army Museum now, so I talk to people coming through there. College kids come through. I always ask them what they're studying, and occasionally there'll be a history major. So I give them the useless degree speech to begin with, and then talk about the value of it
Yeah.
and what you can do.
Yeah.
So, and my grandson, or my nephew, I should say, my grandson's interested in history. He's a mechanical engineer, but minoring in history. My nephew is a PhD. He's the historian and the head of a department at the JAWS, the Joint
Mm-hmm.
Forces Warfighting School there out in Norfolk.
Yes, sir.
Published a couple of books
Yeah.
and everything. So, he's doing okay with a
Yeah.
history degree.
There you
Young guy.
go. Okay. So, speaking to history, when you enter college and kind of your college career, Vietnam is this escalating
Yep.
situation.
Yep.
Is that something that you are paying attention to? Kind of what do you remember about the background of the Vietnam War as you're going through college, ROTC, knowing that you're going to go into the Army when you graduate?
Yeah. Yeah. No, it was obviously a big deal. And now Akron was kind of a conservative campus there. Um, but no, it was a protest. People would harass us in uniform. If there was only one of us, they might try or get into idiotic debates and things. If we were marching through campus, they would unwisely try to get in our way, and it never ended well for them.
Mm-hmm.
Um, we'd see them crumpled up behind us as we marched by seriously on the ground. So there was all that going on. Um, Protest movements occasionally, and some of these, radical speakers they would bring and talk. They weren't always well received too. So I mean, there was as much people for them as against them then at Akron. Um, the professors were the history department. They're pretty conservative. Now, other ones, not so much. The philosophy department, I remember I don't know, have some crazy thing where they were going to be carried in coffins throughout the campus one day. The philosophy department did, but who cared about philosophy? Uh, you know, really. And okay, you can do your thing, but yeah. So it was there, and of course, our ROTC instructors, our freshman year, uh, they were all Korean War and a couple World War II veterans, or both Korea and Vietnam veterans, or Korea and World War II veterans. But when our sophomore year started, and this is kind of when we really started to get more serious about ROTC, at least the group that I was in, mostly us Pershing Rifles people and the other military associated organizations, we got an influx of young captains from Vietnam. And for one, they were not many years older than us. and then had just came back from Vietnam. And that, you know, instant bond. We listened to every word they had to say about what they were doing there, and other assignments. Of course, they had other things to do. Almost all of them made major, I guess, within the first year and a half or so that they were there. A couple of them got a guy who really helped me decide to take the scholarship. Um, Will Banks knows him too. Sid Linver, he was our boss in Fort Hood. Um, uh, was awarded Silver Star there on campus for stuff he did, and a great guy. He talked me out of the Marine. I talked me into the Army by talking up the Marine Corps, and he kind of circular logic. He convinced me that I should take the scholarship and come in the Army. So that's really what it was.
Yeah. So
So that helped.
yeah. So you mentioned earlier that you were interested in aviation.
Yeah.
You ended up commissioning as an infantry officer. Is that correct?
Yeah, I did. Yeah, there was no aviation branch back then, and I thought I wanted to fly fighter jets. This is back, it's what kid doesn't want to be a fighter
Yeah.
pilot? But
Sure.
I realized, well, okay, that's not gonna happen, not for me.
Okay.
Uh,
So
so
as you come upon graduation, do you have this kind of, this idea that
yeah,
you're going to Vietnam? Is that kind of a
yeah. Oh yeah, no, we knew
non-negotiable?
we all knew that. Yeah, it was just a matter of time. And actually, a lot of the kids who weren't in ROTC knew they were going to Vietnam.
Mhm.
Eventually, because the draft was going on, and I had a couple cousins were there, and knew that they were going to probably get drafted. It was that whole thing there.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, it was, even though by the time we graduated, the they were talking about the peace talks were going to begin and so forth, but it was still going on,
Yeah.
of course.
So you graduate, I'm assuming kind of spring 69 commission,
Yeah,
and then off to training. What's that like?
yeah, June of 69. Um, I think we graduated we got commissioned on Saturday, the 14th, and um, graduated on Sunday, the 15th. And the next day, Waymire and I drove to Fort Benning and started IOBC at that time. After we snowbirded for a couple weeks, and then went into IOBC, Airborne and Ranger School. And then we got assigned to Germany.
Gotcha. How was your kind of basic training, that whole process? What
Oh,
was
it
that
was
like?
good. Fort Benning was hot in the summer there, July, August, into September. Hot, humid, buggy. Um, Good as it turned, it was good training that we learned, some of it kind of silly in some ways, but no, it did a good job of preparing us with the fundamental skills you need as a lieutenant. I felt pretty confident, and Ranger School helped immensely. That really kind of puts
Yeah.
the icing on the cake.
How was that different? What was that like for you in 1969?
Different from
Well, just, because Ranger School is this kind of separate thing. And so,
oh yeah, but we had been acculturated to all of this. All these ROTC instructors, two or three of them, Ranger qualified
Mhm.
guys, gave us all sorts of gouge on what to expect and everything. And so in that regard, and then through IOBC, now they don't do the job they do now in BOLIC and probably the last 20 years they've been more than that doing this. But people who go to Ranger School after the basic course are going through a pre-Ranger program. There was none of that. The pre-Ranger was basically IOBC.
Mhm.
And then you had to rely on your own learning and skills as you went through the course
Mhm.
itself. Um, so uh, yeah, so we knew what to expect totally. So none of it was a surprise in that regard.
Gotcha. And sorry, I have a personal interest in kind of the history of the Ranger
Sure.
department. It's a research project I'm
Yeah.
working on.
Yeah.
In 1969, the Ranger School it's a leadership school, but it's also kind of a small unit.
Yeah,
leadership
exactly.
school, correct? Yeah.
Yeah, it is a first and foremost, it is a leadership school, and under arduous conditions, built around um, how to do small unit patrolling. That's what it was then. I think it still kind of is. Those are the patrol, and the tactics are just the vehicle to challenge the student's ability to lead. And there are two components of leadership. Part is the tactical
Mhm.
and technical skills, and then there's the emotional, social leadership, human dimension of it, and they stress all of that. So that's pressure cooker environment, and I don't think that has changed. I don't think they have backed off from that. They really can't, because Rangers going back from the 1950s would rebel if they ever softened it too much. So um, yeah, and it does all those things. And the other at the end of the day, when you come out of there, you're, at least in my case, you're self-confident. So all the things that come out of that, products of that, are either affirmed or reaffirmed or cemented. There,
Was that
I was pretty confident,
sure?
to begin with, going in. I was going to do this, and
Mhm.
um, I I I didn't. I was on the commandant's list in IOBC. I was doing okay, and I enjoyed doing the tactics and things like that, and the skill
Mhm.
training. Um, but wearing that Ranger tab's a big deal.
Yeah, and was that it sounds like you went in kind of immediately. Was that something that, your cohort got to kind of automatically participate in? Was there kind of a narrowing list to get to go to Ranger School so
Yeah,
quickly?
no, then that's a good question. At that time, all regular Army commissionees uh, that were commissioned in the combat arms branches had to go to Ranger School.
Hmm.
And the combat arms branches then were defined as, of course, infantry, armor, um, artillery, and there was just one artillery. There wasn't a separate air defense branch then.
Hmm.
But artillery, engineers, and signal were all viewed as combat arms back
Wow.
in that day. So they all went to Ranger School.
Wow. Okay.
And then
Okay. So, oh
then
yeah,
you
keep
got
going.
weeded out
Hmm.
from the very beginning. People were getting weeded out.
Yeah.
I think if I remember right, we had 35-40% graduation rate in our class of the 300 and some that went through.
Wow. Okay. So sorry for the
That's all right.
detour there. So you finished training. Your first assignment is in where?
In Germany, at Illesheim,
Okay.
Germany, it was then the 4th Armored Division, small uh, compound there in Illesheim, tiny little town. We had an infantry battalion, a tank battalion, a aviation support element. They had fixed wing aircraft there, some corps level thing. We had a platoon of riggers that were there.
Hmm.
So it was that kind. Um, no, I think we had an air defense unit, but their launchers were near us, but they were billeted elsewhere. So yeah, no, that was it.
So what was that like learning that you weren't going to go right to Vietnam?
That was expected.
Oh, okay.
The way it worked, yeah, the way it worked for infantry. They you had to, I guess that was their policy. Uh, be, Between 6 months and a year before you would go to Vietnam, you had to go to another unit.
Gotcha.
So, but if you were overseas, you had to stay at least a year or longer
Hmm.
um, there before they would take you out to send you to Vietnam. I think mostly to keep the other overseas, which was Germany essentially,
Yeah.
um, at some kind of strength level, and then go to Vietnam.
Hmm.
So the people who came, went to the 82nd or out to Fort Carson, they were probably there 8, 10 months, and
Hmm.
then went to Vietnam.
Hmm. What was Army Europe like when you got there?
In retrospect, it was horrible,
Hmm.
and even not even in retrospect, but there, I think it was the feeder for Vietnam. Most of the NCOs Well, there was a mix that had not been to Vietnam and some who had. A few younger soldiers were Vietnam returnees. Um, I think my platoon, when I got there, maybe had 8 people in it, 8 or 10 people. Um, and it was, mech infantry. I had, my four M113s that were, in horrible shape. And at first, for one, they were an older version, hard to maintain, or that for us to maintain, poor parts flow, and all of those kinds of things were challenges there. But we did our best. We had the way training was built then. The tank units, their life focused on gunnery, and ours in the infantry focused on this thing called MISPIC, the Mechanized Infantry Squad Proficiency Course. So that became a big deal, and I think we had to do that twice a year. Um, and we could never put together 9 squads in our company, which you had to do. So we would cross-fertilize people. Our supply sergeant was a squad leader for one hodgepodge squad they put together and all that stuff. But we went out and prepped and rehearsed. Really, what it was wasn't so much training, but rehearsal, because we knew what the course was going to be like. Um, and then usually in the spring, there was a big maneuver type exercise that we'd go through the battalion. They were called ORTTs then, much like an RTEP was now, or I guess mission rehearsal or something like that. So those are the big events that life kind of rotated around. Back in garrison, um, it was a lot of time spent in the motor pool. We did mandatory training lectures and things like that. Not a lot of going to the field, to the local training area to do maneuver or anything. That was very rare for some reason. Uh, so yeah, that was it.
That has been an interesting experience, right? Because Army Europe is a very different job than what you're going to go do in Vietnam,
Right.
right?
Oh yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
yeah,
Um,
yeah. It was.
so okay, so you're there. You said you're there a year. What?
I was there 20 months.
Oh wow. Okay.
Mhm.
So what? At what point do you kind of get ready transition to head to Vietnam?
Uh, I guess the whole time was, I know that's going to be next, and I think um, somewhere in, let's see, this would have been 71. I don't know, in the summer, maybe
Mm-hmm.
June or July. I got
Yeah.
orders for Vietnam to report in October.
So October 71.
One is when I went to Vietnam. So
Mm-hmm.
June, July, I got orders to go, I think. So
Um, and so before we do that, at this point in college, are you single? Are you married? What's
no,
going
we
on?
got married right after, well, actually, between airborne school, or in the middle of airborne school before Ranger school.
Oh wow.
Uh, yeah,
Um,
it wasn't the plan, but
yeah,
it turned out
yeah. It's
that way.
not. It doesn't sound like an uncommon kind of rush timeline too. Did you meet your wife in college?
I knew her since I was in 6th grade.
Oh wow.
Yeah, we were in the same larger neighborhood, and didn't go to the same school, but her brother and I were in Boy Scouts together and played football. We were in the same football team.
Wow. Okay.
So I knew her from there, but we didn't start dating until college.
Did she go to Akron as well?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Um, so and she assumingly signs up for the army life from the
Yeah.
beginning.
Yeah. Whether she knew it or not. And, and she was excited about it too, an adventure and something totally, foreign for all of us. And then going to Germany was
Mhm.
pretty exciting
Yeah.
for that as our first assignment. So,
Um, so she comes with you to Germany. Do you guys have kids before you were off to Vietnam, or is
yeah,
that something?
yeah, yeah, we did. Our son was born at, um, yeah, well, actually, got to Germany in January of 70. Kevin was born in September
Oh, okay.
there in Germany.
So then, young family, as you're getting ready to go to Vietnam,
Yep,
I'm assuming they moved back to the States. What are
they
they
did. They
doing
moved back
in
home. Yeah, moved back to Akron.
okay,
Yeah.
okay. Um, okay, so as you get to Vietnam, what is your assignment? What are you going to do in
Well,
Vietnam?
when I first got there, it was kind of disappointing. Of course, the war is pretty well winding down,
Mhm.
and they're pulling units out right and left. Um, there were, I think, by then there was only two brigades left, infantry brigades out in combat. So I got assigned to USARV headquarters, U.S. Army Vietnam headquarters at first, to work in the command center. I was the OIC of the command center, um, and terribly boring. Uh, and uh, but I um, worked my way out of that. And so in about 4 months, then because the first CAV, the Third Brigade, was nearby at Benoit. Um, so I'm not sure I even went to my boss or anything, who I think was kind of, not, didn't care about much. I went over to the G1 or whatever they were and said, I'd like to put in a intertheater transfer to the first CAV. And he said, you know, fill this out and turn it in. So I did. And then the next thing I know, I'm getting this transferred out to the first CAV. And one of a lieutenant buddy from Germany had branch transferred to AG. He was the assistant deputy G1 or something of the Third Brigade. So he saw the name came in and he said, I got an assignment for you.
Oh,
You'll either go to this battalion or that battalion. They're both good. So that
okay,
that all worked out okay. And I ended up in a good one.
okay.
So that's
Uh,
how that happened.
yeah. So real quick, when you were with USRV, is that in
Mhm.
Saigon?
No, it was in Long Binh.
In Long Binh? Okay.
Mhm.
Um, the largest American base in Vietnam, right?
Yeah, it's
The,
huge.
the
Yeah,
small
yeah.
American city, right? Yeah.
Yeah, it had
Um,
its own VC battalion
wow,
inside. It was.
wow,
Yeah, yeah. Infiltrated things and stuff like that. But yeah. Mhm.
wow. Um, what was that like before we get to that next assignment? What was that like being in the army as it's ostensibly drawing down and getting ready to leave? What's the atmosphere like?
Well, of course, most of the people, 90 some percent probably, um, were ecstatic because
Hmm.
that meant you were going to get out of the army. You
Yeah.
know, and most of the people there were on, 2 year or maybe 3 year commitments. So what it meant to them was that they were going to get to go home.
Hmm.
I think so. Yeah, people with career ambitions were relatively few, but that's just something. Okay, you do another assignment and you go from there,
Hmm.
and figuring out where you wanted to go,
Okay.
things like that.
Uh, so you said you transferred to the third cab,
First Cav,
first cab. Sorry, my
okay,
apologies.
Third Brigade, First Cav.
Third brigade, first cab. Okay. What was that part of your time in Vietnam like? What were you doing?
Yeah, that turned out really really good. For one, the battalion commander was awesome, a guy named Stan Tyson. I think he's still alive out in Tennessee. He was, just a tactically sound battalion commander, a good leader, knew the people, cared for them. So I became the battalion S2 at first. We did not have, there was no, the MI branch was just getting started, but in infantry battalions and others, I guess you were the branch of the unit. So I became the S2, which was actually worked out pretty well because and having been actually at Long Binh in the command center there, I'm watching all the intel stuff every day that's going on at least around our vicinity. So listen to the G2 guys brief and uh, talk to my peers that were working those issues. So it was kind of I had a little bit of an understanding generally what the threat was, and the April offensive had been going on.
Mm-hmm.
now, the big 72 offensive where Wilbanks got surrounded there and on lock.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, that part was really good. There was, within, good group of officers that I was with. I had a great NCO that worked for me, and or I worked for him most likely. But I, I, he said, this intel stuff's real easy. This is kind of what you got to do, and he would feed me recommendations, and I of course started doing briefings with the battalion commander,
Mm-hmm.
figure out. He gave me control of the recon assets if there was, um, we wanted a Nighthawk to do a patrol to the helicopter that flew at night with the big searchlight thing on it, and
Mm-hmm.
plan on those or the other visual recon entities if they can. It was, sometimes they just call up on the radio, whatever their call sign was, Black Knight 22, I got a pair of loaches and a pink team here out of Benoit. You got anything for us? And that, and I would tell him where to go. He gave me that kind of authority
Oh.
to do that. And if we had Rangers going to work in our AOR, they reported to me, and we figured it out where we wanted to insert them, and then
Mm-hmm.
we had all that kind of stuff. So no, that was good.
Yeah,
And then yeah,
that that was going to be my next question. If you ever got to work with in that job, working with kind of the Ranger LRP teams in the kind of
yeah. There was one Ranger company assigned to the Third Brigade,
Mm-hmm.
and I can't say we always had a team in our AO, but pretty much.
Yeah.
There was one that would come in and out, so I kind of got to know them,
Mm-hmm.
uh,
Okay.
at the NCO level and so forth.
Yeah.
That would
Yeah. Okay. So how does that assignment kind of bear out for the rest of
well,
your
well, and that was kind of disappointing because I got selected to command Echo Company, um, and Colonel Tyson said, "This is what I want you to do." Right then, Echo Company had the recon platoon, it had the mortars and the ground surveillance radar section that we had on the thing. And of course, I had known the mortar guys and the radar because, they kind of did their planning through me as a GS2 for those things. And I knew the recon platoon leader. And then we had formed an anti-tank platoon.
Mm-hmm.
And throughout the brigade, it was really kind of tragic. This was in the wake of Onlock when they started bringing in these small tanks, PT-76s and things. So each battalion, there were 3 or maybe 4 battalions in the brigade at that time, were told to create a tow platoon. Well, one of the tow platoons, uh, sadly, not from ours, but they went through all their training. They were going to send them to Vungtown, which is a big R&R center there. And they put them on the Chinook, went out, the Chinook crashed, wiped out the whole platoon. So that, I think, gave people some pause. For one, you had to redo the training. But Colonel Tyson said, I want you to take the people in this tow platoon and turn them into another recon platoon.
Hmm.
And you'll basically be a recon company and figure out where we're going to increase our patrol areas is what he wanted to do. So that sounded pretty good. So I was probably maybe a week in command, and then we got the word that we're going to stand down. The battalion's going home. So that ended that. And that what they did then, the battalion XO said, I need you, Mikolashek, to stand down the S2 function. Because the guy who took my place, I don't know, whatever, he was maybe doing something else. But we had all these classified documents, and we had to do purges of things and destruction, turn it back in, and other classified items. We had all these I was the guy who kept all the foreign weapons. I had, you know, a room full of them. Dispose of them and do all that stuff. He said, that's what I want you to do. And we had maybe a week or 10 days to do that. It was quick. It was one of these timelines. The president said we'll be down to this number by this date. So you guys got to come out. So that's how that ended. So that was in June of 72. So the rules were that then, or believed to be rules, that if your unit got stood down and you had more than 6 months in country, you went home.
Hmm.
So I mean, there's us captains were sitting around, the ones that had more than 6 months, two or three of us there, and okay, this is it. We're going to go home. And then they said, except captains, you guys are staying because there's a shortage of majors, and we're going to program captains against major slots.
Hmm.
So that's how that's going to be. And then the assignments started coming down. I'm not quite sure how that worked, if we got messages or whatever. And I had orders to a thing called ACE 2 Corps, Army Support Element 2 Corps. It was up in Queen Yan, and it was some admin thing again. And Tom Mitchell, my friend there, he had Alpha Company. He got assigned to be an advisor down in the Delta, and I said, "Well, that's what I want to do. I want to do this stuff." And so since I had been to Long Bend when I pressured the deal to come to the CAV, I went back to the same office there, and I was going to tell the guy that I wanted to go. I didn't want to go to H2 Corps, I wanted to be an advisor somewhere, or to the Ranger Battalion or the Vietnamese Airborne, one of those HUA type things.
Mm-hmm.
So it was funny. I went down there, and I'm standing outside this guy's office, and he's a major. They're wearing khakis at the time on Long Bend. They didn't wear fatigues, as we called them. He's got his khakis on. He's got a CIB, a DSC, and two silver stars and a Purple Heart. Those are the only ribbons he's wearing. And but the guy, there's another captain from the CAV who went there into the office before me. And I knew this guy. He was the S1 of one of the other infantry battalions. And I hear this guy ask him, what does he want? And he wants to go home. I've been here for 7 months and this and that. And my wife needs me and, child, this, that, and the other thing. And I just need to go home. And the guy said, nope. You're going to go to this role right here and you'll report on this date. And when you go back to Benoit, you tell, any of your other MFers from the CAV to just stay away. And he said, then he looks at me and he says, and what do you want? And I said, well, here's what I want.
Yeah.
I guess I want to go back to Benoit. And I told him the situation. And he says, you want to be a combat advisor in the Delta? And I said, yeah, that's what I want to do. And he said, as it turns out, I have oversubscribed ACE 2 Corps at Queen Yan, and they can use you down in the Delta.
Oh, wow.
So that's when I got assigned down there. So the last 4 months I was down in Trung Tien province, way in the southern part of Vietnam. And that was wonderful. Worked with some of the best people you could imagine down there.
Yeah.
And so that was a really good experience.
Working with an ARVN unit?
Well, I was at the district headquarters, so we worked with their Rough Puffs, Regional Force, Popular Force
for sure
people there. So I was the advisor to them. We had an ARVN unit that was in there that had come in temporarily and replaced the one that had been sent up to Onlock. So we only coordinated with them, but most of our day-to-day activities were with the provincial type
Mm,
organization that they had. And
gotcha.
then our artillery advisor left and wasn't going to be replaced, so I then became the artillery advisor
Mm,
as well, which really just amounted to getting resources for them,
yeah.
uh, for, for them to.
Um, what was the war like down in Four Corps for the Rough Puffs at
Yeah,
that point in the war?
it was very lively. It was an active. Of course, this was in '72 when
Hmm.
they were coming south. There were four NVA regiments in our province at the
Wow.
time. The VC threat was pretty diminished
Yeah.
at this point in time. They were still there, but they were not the main threat. Um, that ARVN unit that was stationed there um, walked into a battalion-sized ambush one day, and I used to carry around, I probably still have it somewhere, the note card that I took um, after that happened with all the casualties they had there. It was pretty bad, and we'd get rocketed, or yeah, I guess rockets, not mortars so much. Occasionally, small arms fire.
Yeah.
But we were kind of at the edge of the city, so still that was there
Yeah.
keeping
Um,
that going on.
so before we get to the end of your time in Vietnam, how much are you a big letter writer? Are what's your
Yeah.
communication like back with
Well,
your team?
I wrote a letter home every day that I could.
Wow. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
So you get pretty constant communication in
Yeah.
that regard,
From
eh?
that, yeah.
Yeah.
And and given the fact, I moved
Yeah.
twice,
Yeah.
it took a while to come up, but that's how we communicated.
Okay.
I did call um, a few times. I used the Mars systems,
Hmm.
for two or three events, coordinating a R&R and stuff like that. I was able to do that. And
Yeah.
occasionally, uh, the Red Cross had an actual telephone that you could go and sign up for. And if you were there at the time, and, you could actually make a regular telephone call.
Hmm.
So
You said
rather,
you got to do that a few times.
yeah, yep.
Gotcha. Okay.
I don't, I think, but when I was an advisor, no, that didn't work.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Um,
And I don't think it worked when I was in the cab. Maybe it did once when I went to Benoit one time.
okay. And what kind of stress challenges was that? Did that include your tour in general, but then also kind of as you transfer into this advisory role that seems closer to the hot part of the war?
Yeah, no, it was you know, you get with good people, none of that stuff happens.
Yeah.
It was good.
Okay.
I didn't have any, other than the normal
Hmm.
getting work done kind of stress. But
Yeah. Okay. Uh, so then in that advisor role, how much longer are you in Vietnam? How does that come to an
about,
end?
let's see, I was there on the 4th of July, so July, August, September into October, almost 4 months.
Wow. Okay. So really up to the end of the war almost, like pretty
Yeah,
close.
oh yeah, yeah. End of October is when I came home. 23rd of October, I think.
Gotcha. How was that leaving Vietnam and coming home?
It was wonderful.
Yeah.
Yep. Yeah, it was cool. I had, I worked for a guy named Colonel Meese, Bob Meese. He was the province senior advisor, and he had built a team of mostly former 173rd guys. He had been the brigade S3 of the 173rd. My immediate boss had been the Cav troop commander in the 173rd. Our two advisors had been district advisors had been in the 173rd. So it was really, some dedicated paratrooper kind of people there. So he took care of me, and a nice farewell ceremony. Um, Got on the Freedom Bird, which is a helicopter. And there's one interesting part of that, though. I think the most scared I was while I was in Vietnam happened that night.
Mm.
Uh, for one, again on a helicopter, this wasn't part of the scary part, but it was interesting. And we're going to fly to Canton, which was the biggest city down there. We just flew straight line over a canal. that went in there. And then, so I'm sitting in the back, me and a couple other people who were going on another business. Um, I look up and the crew chief is flying a helicopter. And, they did that every now and then. Um, they let the guy, and I finally said to the pilot, I said, I know this crew chief guy's a pretty good dude, but this is my freedom flight. Could you like really take over the stick? And he laughed and then did, and, and flew it in. Um, so I get to Kanto, and a couple interesting things happen. Then I got to get to Saigon, and the way you did this was all like hitchhiking.
Mm-hmm.
So I go there. There's some aviation terminal there, and there's going to be um, one of these Air America C-46 things that are going to fly into Tansanut. Uh, so I'm waiting to get on the plane, and off the plane comes these two or three guys in civilian clothes, sports coats and stuff like that. And they're waiting for their transportation. I'm waiting to get on the plane, and I asked them what they were doing, and they said, "Well, we're from Texas, and we're here to look at the shrimp industry because we want to market the shrimp." And down there in the Delta, I mean, we would get these prawns on there that were huge,
Mm-hmm.
and they're great. And he said, "Yeah, we want to take advantage of those. We think there's a good opportunity for this to be marketed here." So that was kind of an encouraging thing that, there's American business wanting to come here to Vietnam and turn it around. So it was kind of a positive thing amidst all the other negative things. So, but I make it to Saigon or to Tan Son Nhut, and I knew I had to go to a thing called the MACV Annex, which they had a BOQ thing there, because that's where I stayed when I went down to Chungcheon to the advisory team. So, and I knew there was a bus that ran from uh, the Tan Son Nhut to the MACV Annex to the billeting thing there. So I'm carrying a rucksack and I have a duffel bag on the top of the rucksack. So I go, and no weapon at all. So I go waddling off to the bus stop. It's kind of getting late in the afternoon then, and the bus driver says, "Where are you going?" I said, "I'm going to the MACV Annex to get a BOQ." And he said, "The MACV Annex is closed. There's no BOQ there. You got to get on a bus to go to some hotel that had some state name, like Minnesota or something like that, which just was a hotel that I had heard of." And he said, "But I'm not going there because at this time of the day, I'm on a one-way trip to wherever it was on the other side of Saigon or down the way." He said, "But I'll tell you what, there's another bus that is going to come back to here on its last leg of the day, and their stop, they will take you to Minnesota or Virginia, whatever it was." And I said, "Okay." He said, I'll just drop you off right here." So boom, there I am in Saigon, Cholan, standing there. Nothing, nothing, nothing coming. It's starting to get dark. And the only weapon I have is my little demo knife that I have with me. And so I said, this is uh, scary. So I'm not going to do this very long. And when it starts to really get dark, I find there's some sickle guy that had these little uh, motorized bicycles with a little seat up front, and they would drive them through. So uh, I said, "Well, I got to get to Tan Son Nhut because that's where I can figure out how to get to this Minnesota or whatever it was." So I hired this Sickalo guy and to take me to the front gate of the Tan Son Nhut, and then I'll figure it out from there. But yeah, I didn't know what was going to happen. I mean, this guy And they had, not long before that, there was an American that had been killed and dumped in a canal in Saigon. And
Yeah.
I don't know what caused, but it was not, fun.
Mhm.
And I'm all alone, and no weapon. I would have been okay if I had a rifle or pistol or something like that. I could at least, you know, do
Yeah.
something. So I'm approaching Pontoon, and this MP Jeep pulls us over. And they say, Captain, these are illegal for you to be in. I said, well, I didn't know that. And then in the advisory team, we called them like get out of jail free cards. And it said something to the effect of this person is an advisor and he's allowed to be in places that normal Americans aren't allowed to be because of your advisory and all that stuff.
Mhm.
And I said, I got this card. He said, it doesn't mean anything. You can't be on that thing. So what's the story? And I told him, and he said, getting back in the Jeep, and I'll take you to the Minnesota or whatever it was.
Oh, wow.
And and that's how that ended.
Wow.
Um, and then sat around this place called Camp Alpha, waiting to come home, and it worked out fine.
Yeah. Uh, yeah, it's a hell of a way to leave the country.
Yeah,
And
right. Yeah, right.
yeah. So when you get home, what's it like coming home from a war that is,
Not popular.
over for a lot of people, unpopular for most
Yeah,
people, and
yeah,
yet obviously still going on.
yeah. I'm just happy to be home, see my wife and son, my dad and mom, and
Mhm.
everybody. And I didn't experience, my wife had more negativity than I did, I believe, while I was gone. When I came home, it was kind of odd. Um, yes, I flew into San Francisco. Um, did we fly into Travis? I guess we did, and then bust down to the airport, San Francisco airport. Um, and a friend of mine from college, we were going home same day.
Mm.
What happened? You're all standing around waiting for your name to be on the manifest to go home. And so, they posted it like, twice a day, I guess, for the next day plus a flight. So we're both standing there and they pop up. And he's going on an earlier flight than I am. So he's mocking me and stuff. And I'm going on one. It's just a few hours
Yeah.
difference. But so we get on the plane. It turns out his plane's going through Alaska. Mine was going through Guam. I got to San Francisco first. And later I saw him and I beat you home. But so I go to the airport and you had to fly in dress uniform then. We couldn't fly in fatigues. That was the rule. Officers couldn't anyway. So I go up to the USO. They gave me a razor and stuff like that. I changed. I go down, and I'm not quite sure. I guess I had travel voucher or something to get a flight, and they're very helpful figuring out the flights. And I hadn't told my wife yet that I was coming home.
Mm.
I want to tell her until I was here. So, and the airlines people, they're like incredibly bend over backwards to help you. We can work on the best thing. We can do this and that. And they figured it out. Um, and while I'm waiting there, this guy comes up. He's wearing fatigues with no belt and um, civilian shoes. And back then, military could fly Space A. It was like half price
Mm.
on regular airlines. Of course, you had to have an ID card, do all that kind of stuff. He says, well, I'm in the Army and I want to get a flight to so-and-so. And so the gate agent or the agent there says, okay, well, let me see your ID card and your orders. And he said, well, I lost them. I don't have them. And she said, well, if you can go get them, then I can do this for you. He says, well, I'm in uniform. We can fly in uniform. He's got no belt. I mean, she figured out this guy's full of shit.
Yeah.
Says, go away, basically. So I congratulated her for doing that. She said, you wouldn't believe what we get in here.
Wow.
So no, it worked fine. And then uh, I I was so this was all at night. Then I fly, I guess, the red eye into Chicago. So it's morning time now in Eastern and Central time zone. When I was in Chicago, I called Jan and said, I'll be home in 3 hours. Can you get my dad to pick me up? And that was that.
That's gonna be a good feeling.
Yeah. So she and my dad and my son came out to meet me
That's wonderful.
there.
So kind of in a bigger picture moment, right now that you're back from Vietnam, are you, as you're going through Germany and Vietnam, are you kind of in the mindset that you're going to be career? Is this a goal for you? What are your
Yeah, well,
aspirations kind of long term?
I had a 4 year commitment, so I had a couple more years to go. So I knew at least for another 2 years. But I probably wasn't like 100% sure.
Mhm,
Matter of fact, I'm no, I wasn't. I'm considering what else could we do, and
mhm.
I was thinking about going to law school and stuff fairly seriously. But matter of fact, I think I took the LSAT while I was in Vietnam.
Hmm.
They're probably
So
not the ideal place to take it.
I not the yeah not the ideal
Right.
testing
Right.
environment.
But they offered it. They offered it. So you can take the LSAT. I had no prep at all.
Well,
Um, I don't know how well I did because I never got beyond doing that. But I was just, you talk to other buddies of yours, what they might do and
yeah.
this or that, and kind of convince yourself that maybe it's something to do. Um, and it's like, well, what can you do with a history degree? But that, it's something I thought of too. History. I could be a lawyer. I had an uncle who's a lawyer. So yeah, so that it's always. I think you always have to have options available to you, whatever it is. So uh,
Well, yeah, and the army in the kind of immediate post-Vietnam moment isn't, the shining example of efficiency and all those things. And so there
right,
are probably
right.
lots of people trying to get out.
Oh yeah, everybody. It seemed everybody you knew. It was when are you going to get out?
Yeah.
At some point
Hmm.
there. Jan was okay with staying in. We had ups and downs. There were some days worse than others that said, "Now you got to leave."
So
But
so it's kind of a two-part. You mentioned, at some point during your tour, do you get promoted to captain? Is that
oh,
what
before I left, yeah, because
before you left?
it was 2 year, it was a 2 year deal. 1 year to
Okay.
first lieutenant, 1 year to captain.
Okay. So
And
that's kind of standard
yeah, so
timeline.
yeah, that was the period. That was the And then shortly after that, they started extending out the promotion window, and it ended up being 3 years to captain.
Okay. So then what is kind of the deciding factor for you then to kind of re-up and stay in the Army post-Vietnam?
Well, so um, I was in, and so I went to Fort Campbell after Vietnam. So I'm there at Fort Campbell, finished out my. So I probably could have stayed in. They had another riff
Hmm.
then and booted a bunch of people. I had I didn't want to really get out then. For one, I had a job and it was going okay. Um, and so, thinking about it at some point in time, I still had this lawyer thing, I guess, in the back of my mind, and uh, but it never excited me enough to do that. And as um, let's see, then I guess we went to the advanced course then after Fort Campbell. Yep. So I
Hmm.
was down at Fort Benning. So there I am amidst all my captain buddies.
Yeah.
Lot of them. John Waymeyer, the same guy I was talking about, he was there. People I had served with for a long time. It was a very bad experience at Fort Campbell. Probably the worst assignment
Hmm.
that I had, and it's all because of the leadership. Um, when I and I'm not the only one who will think that because there are other people still do comment on this. When I first got there, they were building the 101st out of scratch. Everybody came from Vietnam and they were building it back up. The uh, they put top flight commanders in all the positions there at the time. My battalion commander was wonderful. Uh, and the brigade commander, a guy named Howard Danford. Matter of fact, and I wrote one of these pamphlets for the Army War College about command, responsibility of command. And I quote him in there. It's the way he was. So, but when those guys all left, they replaced them with really, you wonder where they came from.
Mm.
They really were idiots as battalion and brigade commanders. A guy who was our battalion commander, he was horrible, and the XO was an alcoholic, and you know, it was just bad, and the Army was really screwed up. We're going to the volunteer Army at this time. We're doing AIT in the unit, and I had the headquarters company, so on paper, anybody who was going through AIT was assigned to my company, but they all worked and their training was done by one of the line companies.
Mm.
Uh, for some reason, that's how it was. So, and these guys were going AWOL right and left. So, me and all the other headquarter companies in the division, infantry ones, had like the highest AWOL rate because as soon as they would get their $2,500, that was the deal. You become an infantryman, you get a $2,500 bonus
Mm.
upon completion. These guys got their $2,500, they were gone in large numbers. So every graduation of a AIT class, your AWOL rate quadrupled.
Wow.
And then regular soldiers you had were going AWOL at the time. So, it was just bad. There, certainly the last year or so, that was pretty horrible.
Were you there in 75 when South Vietnam fell? Is that where
No,
you were?
I was
No.
at Fort Benning.
Gotcha. Okay.
Yeah, yeah. So I left Campbell in December of 74 and then went right to Benning, and our advanced course started in January of 75, went through September. So yeah, we were there when both Cambodia and Vietnam fell.
Yeah. What do you remember about that, being in the Army
Well,
kind
the
of?
Cambodian one in particular, of course, you were watching it on TV every day. You're kind of watching the march. They show the arrows of the Cambodians coming into Phnom Penh. And we had a number of Cambodian students in our class.
Yeah.
There are quite, probably quite a few, maybe 10, 12, maybe more than that. And we're out there doing some, the platoon in the attack or some training, but we're out in the field there, and we're out there, and one of these speaker trucks comes by, and you could hear it and saying, "All Cambodian students report to Red Diamond Road," which is one of the main roads for more than Fort Benning. And so they go. We never see them again.
Whoa.
And their country fell. And
Yeah.
they gave them, I guess, two choices. They could go back to Cambodia. They could go to a third country if they could find one, or if they found a sponsor, they could stay here. And one of my classmates there, a captain, a guy named Bill Prince, he sponsored two or three of them.
Okay, so yeah, so what's it like being in the Army when, outside this Cambodian experience, right, that you were talking about, what's it like being in the Army as Vietnam officially, I guess, ends?
Yeah, it was kind of sad. I mean, it's very tragic to watch how it unfolded there. And again, I tie it back to that meeting the shrimp farmers that which was then, I guess, 3 years before. There was cause for optimism
Yeah.
there, and to see that all kind of evaporate. But I think anybody could see it coming, particularly when the decision was made to not support them with air support, things like that.
For sure. Okay, so at this point, you probably make the decision somewhere in here to kind of re-up and continue your career in the Army. At that point, are you thinking then career? What's your kind of aspiration?
Yeah, well, it was a little bit later. It was probably was in 75, I guess, because we ended up at Fort Hood there. Now, again, I was supposed to go to the 3rd Brigade of the Cav, and I got diverted again go to the Corps staff, which I dreaded. They were standing up a 3rd Corps just got identified that it would have a deployable mission there, kind of thing. And this is all recovery from Vietnam kind of stuff.
Mm-hmm.
And so they wanted a combat arms officer with an intel background to fill one of these slots they had up there in their core planning cell. So I was it. And I even went on leave. I told them, I said, listen, if another guy comes in that's more qualified than me, will you let me go to the first cav? They said yes. So I waited, like 3 weeks, and they said nobody's coming in, so you got to go here. So I did, and it worked out. I worked for a really good guy. He was a former Arab FAO or an Arab FAO guy named Tex D. Atkins, still writes a lot. And I told him my woe that I didn't want to be here. He said, I didn't either. Matter of fact, I was supposed to command an artillery battalion and they diverted me from it. I said, okay, I got nothing to complain about. So that worked out okay. But while I was there, Jan and I, we started talking, and I started going to these recruiting things, where I can't remember the name of it, would come try to recruit junior officers. There was some organization that did that.
Mm-hmm.
So I was thinking about doing that. I interviewed with Ross Perot's company
Mm-hmm.
there, and I was kind of getting serious about it. Now, by this time had gone on. I had this like, well, 2 years gone on. I had um, gone down. I did after about 10 months up at the Corps headquarters. I went to the 3rd Brigade of the 1st Cav. I was an assistant S3, in a brigade S3 shop captain, and then got put in company command in 112, same unit I was in Vietnam, of Alpha Company. And I had done all the interviews with whatever the Rose company was called, still is out there, EDS.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm thinking that, I'm not sure I really want to do this. And so I got a call in the motor pool from this recruiter up in Dallas. And he said, I really got this good opportunity for you. It's more on the line of, you could be a good recruiter for us and everything. You got the right personality and everything. And, I'm standing in the office in the motor pool. I'm looking out there at my line of APCs, my troops doing maintenance. And I said, I'm not going to give this up.
Yeah.
And I said, no, I'm done. I'm staying in. So there it was.
That was it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Never thought about it since.
Gotcha. Okay. Um, so then, walk me through kind of what the next, couple years, decade looks like in the Army post Vietnam. You signed on
Yeah.
to kind
No,
of
it was good. Fort Hood was a good assignment. Again, worked for great people. Great guy named Tom Bullock was the brigade commander. Then I had General Shack now as a battalion commander. Wilbanks and I we're again together. Wilbanks and I serving together. Same brigade, same battalion.
Yeah.
And we deployed to Germany. Our battalion was selected part of this Brigade 75. And we were supposed to then rotate for a 6-month TDY, and then we were going to move up to Garlstedt. And we were excited about that. The family was excited. Janet ready to go back to Germany and do something. And but that they weren't ready. The barracks weren't ready, so they sent us back to Fort Hood. So I stayed in command another year. I'm ready to leave. Then, came out on the promotion list to major. They made me the brigade S2 because now by this time we had to pick your alternate specialties. You had to have two, and intel was mine, given that I had 2 assignments already in it. So I was the brigade S2 working for, kind of a strange brigade commander, but it was okay. So I learned about that. And then I first got notice, this backs up about a year, I got orders or a RFO to go to either Japan or Korea in an intel slot. Um, so They said, but you need to send in a dream sheet that has Japan on it. So see, that's a game they played.
Yeah.
Well, it's not on your dream sheet, but if you give us one and I send you to Japan, I get credit
Yeah. For
for,
asking.
meeting your requirement. So I did, and then we get orders to Korea. So we're getting ready, thinking about going to Korea, and then they call me up and said, "Listen, you're on the majors list, or you may come out on the majors list, and this is a captain slot, so I don't want to assign you against a captain slot, so we're going to hold off for a year."
Oh,
Okay, and
well.
so stayed at Hood for another, whatever that was, about a year from there. But then it comes time, and that infantry branch then calls me and assigns me to Japan. And Wilbanks is already in Japan. Somehow he was there for a year before. So
Yeah.
and that was another one of the tricks they did. They said um, we're gonna assign you there as the aide to the CG. I said, well, that sounds interesting.
Yeah.
So we did that. Of course, there was no intent of me being the aide to the CG. So and Will Banks knew all that. He said, this is how it's going to go. But um, you can get into the G2. So they did. And that's what I ended up going to work in the G2. And again, worked for another great guy. They're very hardcore, dedicated, competent intel guy.
Mhm.
And it was fun. I worked with Japanese on the defense of Japan. And it was it was fun for that year. And then I got made the SGS. So Secretary of the General Staff for the Corps. And then the CG picked me as his aide. Uh, so
You
Roscoe,
eventually, you
yeah,
eventually did end up. Yeah.
right. Yeah. So I was his aide, uh, probably about 3 months. It wasn't very long. And then he got orders. He's getting promoted to 4 stars to go be the mill rep at NATO. And he asked me if I would stay with him.
Hmm.
So I did. That was a great opportunity. So I went with General Robinson to Brussels.
Yeah.
And
That sounds like a pretty important career moment, I would imagine.
yeah. And he told me, he said, normally I just keep my aides for a year, but and I had not gone to the staff college yet. I had been selected, and you had to be overseas for over 2 years before they would move you back. So you're going to have to extend and defer your staff college. And I said, well, I could go to the Armed Forces Staff College and I would graduate about the same time I would have. And he said, that's a good idea.
Hmm.
So that's what we did. So I ended up being his aide for about a year and a half.
In
Came
Brussels.
back and went to Norfolk.
Oh, gotcha.
Yeah.
Okay.
Um,
How was that? You said he was transferred to a NATO position?
yeah. He was the U.S. military representative to the NATO Military Committee. Then
Wow.
it was a 4 star. Now it's a 3 star billet, but then it was a 4 star. Each of the nations have a permanent military representative there,
Hmm.
and that's what he did.
Oh.
So that was good.
Yeah. Is this into the 1980s yet? I'm
Yeah, that
guessing.
was 84.
84. Okay.
Yeah.
Is the Army coming out of the Vietnam shadow, in your opinion, by this
Oh
point?
yeah,
What's
yeah,
it feel like?
yeah. Oh yeah. And that was what was one of the interesting things about Fort Hood. All that was being changed. Yeah, change in tactics and doctrine. We were starting the active defense kind of stuff that we were doing, and doing different war games, and all of that kind of stuff. So when we did CPXs, FTXs, it was all kind of newer. How to fight manuals were coming out.
Mm-hmm.
Whole training of junior soldiers, the squad or the SQT soldiers qualification tasks was all coming out. RTEPs were being made. Squad XFLs, all of that stuff was all happening.
Mm.
So it was good time
Yeah.
to be in the Army.
Yeah.
A resurgence in study of history
Mhm.
and so forth. It's pretty good.
Okay. So, in now into the 80s, you're approaching that 20-year mark, right? What's the calculus on?
Yeah, 89, I would have
Yeah.
had 20 years in. But,
So what's
no, I was gonna, I kind of decided I wanted to be a battalion commander at that point in
okay.
time.
Okay. Does that happen after this aide position slash maybe the staff
Well, no,
college?
that's what I wanted to do. So,
Yeah. Okay.
I'm a major, so I'm not ready for lieutenant colonel yet,
Mhm.
or anything. So,
Okay.
but yeah, no, I pretty much
Okay.
settled on doing that. Assuming you get promoted and you do these things.
Yeah. Well, and
And
that, if I understand it correctly, right, that is one of the major kind of narrowing pathways in the Army, right, from major to lieutenant colonel to colonel, right? How do you navigate that?
well, to me, then it was major
Okay.
because there's only a 50% selection rate in our year groups. Again, they're getting rid of the Vietnam bulge
Mhm.
that they had, so they just cut back selection rates. So it's like a 50-50 chance. And that was a big concern. You had no idea whether you're going to make it or not.
Mhm.
I was okay, but I didn't have a perfect file. I had, you get some dings here and there, uh, stuff. So, and I remember the day, uh, well, actually, it was Jim Wilbanks. Before the list came out, he had some inside knowledge, and I was commanding the company then, and he was the assistant. He was the battalion S3, and he said, "You can come up to battalion." So I did. We're not uncommon. And he says, "I heard from so and so. He's seen the list, and we're both on it." And he gave me a big hug.
That's a big
Yeah,
moment.
yeah, it was.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah. That guy's
yeah,
everywhere, man.
yeah, that's right.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Um, and then once
and I
once
got
that
promoted in '80,
gotcha. And
and
once
then
that happens, is the pathway to colonel and kind of forward, is that not easier, but is it kind of
bet, yeah,
achievable?
right.
Yeah.
It's better. Yeah, if you
Yeah.
do the right things.
Yeah.
Yeah, once you make major, the selection rate to lieutenant colonel was probably 70%
Hmm. Okay.
or something like that.
Okay.
Nothing
So
guaranteed.
yeah. So kind of big picture stuff, right? Being in the Army as the 80s kind of come and go, right? What's that like as the Cold War is essentially, coming to an end, and it seems that there's a knowable outcome at the end of it.
Yeah. So I was at the War College then in '89 when the wall came down. Um, and of course, having been in NATO and all that stuff, I could imagine it was pretty exciting to watch all of that. Um,
Okay, yeah, so we're talking about kind of the Army, end of the 80s, end of the Cold War. What's that like being an officer? What's kind of the prospect moving past that?
yeah. Well, again, it was all exciting, and of course the unknown, what was going to happen, because then the threat kind of disappeared.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but what the Army does wasn't going to change at my level. Um, I had commanded a battalion already by the time I got to the War College in '89. Spent 5 years at Fort Lewis with Will Banks, by the way. And so, we're just doing our job, training, being ready, and so forth. Um, then, so yeah, and the War College was an interesting time because when I was there, and I stayed for an extra year on the faculty because I came on the brigade command list.
Mm-hmm.
Um, so the wall came down in '89 uh, there. So again, it's all this, future of the army and so forth. But then a year later, then Saddam Hussein goes into Kuwait.
Mm-hmm.
So then that just changed how what we did. The purpose of the army changed. Now we had one that was obvious. We didn't need to worry about, well, we didn't have the Soviet threat anymore. We got real stuff
Mm-hmm.
to do. So that was huge.
Mm-hmm.
And
Did you serve in Desert Storm?
no, I didn't. I was on a brigade command list, and there were a number of us. We were replacements because we thought we were going to have high casualties.
Mm-hmm.
So I went through all my pre-command course and everything, but thankfully that never happened.
Yeah.
So I went to brigade command then at Fort Leonard Wood, which was kind of disappointing to have a training command, but you do what you got to do.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and and that was okay. It was, training soldiers every day, working with drill sergeants. You had a different set of problems
Sure.
to deal with. that whole environment there is just it's a
Hmm.
different mindset. The engineer school, they approach things differently.
Yeah.
But it worked out okay for the best. Uh, and again, worked for some really well. One, my boss, General Chrisman, who later superintendent of West Point and very smart guy. Uh, then I went to Fort Stewart. I was the chief of staff of the division there, 24th Division, for a year. During that time, Somalia happened, so we're
Hmm.
deploying people to Somalia. And then I went to the Pentagon for a year, working with the guy Blackwell, who was the division commander there. Also had been my brigade commander at Fort Lewis, and Will Banks worked for him. Uh, so yeah, we did all that. He became the G3 of the Army. He brought me up there to the Pentagon, and I was the chief of current ops down in the basement for a year. Got selected for brigadier and went then to the 82nd, where I was ADC.
Yeah.
Did that for a year. Hmm.
That moment when you're selected for the star, right? What's that like? Is that something you expected? Is that something that was
Oh, no, no, no,
no,
no. I
no?
mean, in the whole grand scheme of life, I never expected it. I suppose there was always a chance,
Hmm.
that got pretty high as I became a chief of staff of a division.
Hmm.
But, I commanded a training brigade, and very few of those guys make general officer.
Hmm.
So, the odds were against me. But I remember General Blackwell called me into the office and he gave me one of his old one stars and said, "This is
Wow.
for you."
Wow.
So, yeah,
That's gonna be a pretty incredible moment.
it was. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah,
So
yeah.
at that point, then you're going to be in the army for considerably
Oh,
longer, I would imagine.
until I'm told to leave, essentially.
Yeah. Yeah.
Mhm. Yeah.
So is that when is that?
That was in 94.
94. Okay. Okay.
Yeah.
So you become a brigadier and then continue doing those jobs till, what's the next
Well,
thing
I
that
just I just had two jobs as a one star. I was at ADC of the 82nd, deputy commander. Then I went to Kuwait and worked in the embassy there, the Office of Military Cooperation, for a little over 2 years. Came out on the two-star list, and then went to Italy to command the Southern European Task Force in
mm,
Vicenza Airborne Unit there, which was another great experience.
yeah.
That was again in the wake of the end of the Cold War, so all this partnership for peace and all that. So we got involved in doing like training Ukrainians, and it
Mm-hmm.
was a rapid response mission, mostly to evacuate embassies in Africa. So we did
Mm,
exercises in Africa, both there and command post exercises. Um, then Kosovo, or yeah, Bosnia erupted
mm-hmm.
Kosovo. So I was the strategic reaction force for Bosnia for a while. So I had people there and involved with all of that. And Kosovo happened, and we were again, uh, you know, we had parachuted into Kosovo one time as a show of force.
Wow.
So, all that exciting stuff was going on at that
Yeah.
time. And
Yeah.
that, yeah, so that, went on for about a year. And then, let's see, when did I think it was in 2000? Then,
2000.
yeah, and I took over Third Army. So came back to Fort McPherson, where their headquarters was. And, so I'm back in the Middle East. And, the first year was, uh, doing a lot of travel to the Middle East. I had, commands in Kuwait, Qatar, and Saudi Arabia.
Mm-hmm.
Um,
Is this
exercise.
is this this is when you've gotten your third star?
Yeah.
Is
Mhm.
that okay?
Yeah.
It went pretty fast. It sounds like from 1 to 3. Is that normal?
I don't know.
Oh, okay.
I only had one assignment as a
Yeah.
two,
Okay.
and I was only a two-star for a year and a half, maybe.
Gotcha. Okay.
So, uh, um, Yeah.
So so 2000, and then where are you when 9/11 happened?
Well, I was there. I was there physically. I was at Maxwell Air Force Base in Montgomery, Alabama,
Hmm.
talking to this flag officer, fire, or what did they call it? Uh, Flag officer orientation course, something about they took all, it was a joint program run at the Air War College there for mostly one star, some two stars, and it was about joint operations,
Mm.
trying to build jointness. So, and I would do that whenever they had them. The three component commanders, Army, Navy, and Air Force, would come and give a presentation on, because the mission there was how to fight, defend Kuwait.
Hmm.
That was our, in the Central Command uh, mission set, which was the only real likely possibility of war
Yeah.
anywhere in the world. So we went through our plans and how we coordinated and our vision of how it was going to go. And I was getting ready to give that presentation when the building got hit. And we were
Mm.
watching it on TV.
Wow.
And I said right there, I said, I think this emanated from my AOR and I got to go home.
Wow.
So I was lucky because I didn't fly there because I could drive to Atlanta. So the other guys had to fly. And of course, there's no airplanes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, so are you then involved with kind of the initial operations in Afghanistan? What's
Well, that was all done. Of course, I was CENTCOM, planned all
the?
that. Initially, it was done by Rangers, Special Ops,
Hmm.
JSOC, all that kind of stuff was.
Hmm.
So I was not directly involved, but I had a lot of concerns, force protection wise, for my commands that were out there. We didn't know what we didn't know.
Hmm.
What other plans does Al Qaeda have? And then Saddam Hussein.
Hmm.
Whether he might think he sees a momentary weakness in the U.S. defense of Kuwait, so he might make a run on Kuwait. I don't think anybody believed that he was involved in Al Qaeda
Hmm.
with them at all. But we needed to assure the Kuwaitis that we were ready, so we deployed a brigade combat team to Kuwait,
Hmm.
which we've done before and rehearsed uh,
Hmm.
pretty regularly. So we did that and then began the planning for what was going to become Enduring Freedom
Hmm.
uh, beyond that.
Were you so to fast forward, what year do you retire?
2005.
2005. So you are involved, taking part in the initial invasion of Iraq and Enduring Freedom?
I did the planning for it then. I left command in 2002 of
Okay.
Third Army and became the IG.
Hmm.
So I was the IG of the Army when Iraq went
Okay.
down.
Was that your final
Yeah,
posting?
assignment. Right. Mhm.
How was
Yeah.
that for a final posting?
Well, no, it's an honorable one. I don't think it's anything anybody like aspires to be, the Inspector General, because it's got its challenges,
Hmm.
but it's an honorable one. Yeah, upholding the standards and honor of the Army,
Hmm.
and so it's a very important job. Get to see a lot, learn a lot, be exposed to a lot, talk to a lot of soldiers.
Yeah.
I could go everywhere that I wanted to. And,
Hmm.
Uh, I worked for General Shinseki, then General Keane, and
Hmm.
General Schoonmaker there. So, that was pretty impressive bunch of people to work for
Yeah.
there. I did downsides. You get into some of the difficult times that the Army has. Uh, I did the investigation for Abu Ghraib,
Oh, wow.
or detainee, I should more properly call it detainee abuse. Uh,
Yeah.
and then all the other officer misconduct and things like that you have to contend with
Wow.
as well.
That had to be a hard part of that job.
Yeah, it is. Yeah, kind of disappointing in some ways because you see the
Hmm.
behavior of some of these people that you've known, and it's kind of upsetting in many ways.
Yeah. Wow. Um, okay, so 2005 you retire. Is that your decision? Is that the Army's decision? What's that?
Well, it was kind of both. It's the IG is the last job you have. They
Gotcha.
So um, and I had been there over 2 years.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, and and there's other people that got to promote. So no, the vice called me in and he said, I think next year it's time for you to go. So yeah.
Um, okay, so as you leave the army, I've got some kind of wrap up kind of big picture questions, if that's okay.
Sure.
Um, yeah, so if you had, this is a hard question, and everyone laughs when I ask this. What was your favorite part of serving? Do you have a favorite assignment and a favorite job you had? What?
Yeah, well, there's a number of them, I guess. Uh, Certainly, Command and CTAF was wonderful. The time in Kuwait, working in the embassy there, a small team of people with a hard job, working for I worked for Ryan Crocker, who was ambassador, and Jim LaRocco. So in terms of expanding what I knew and what I learned, it was like getting a master's degree in Middle East studies, working for Ryan Crocker
Yeah.
each and every day, getting mentored and coached and taught and working serious problems with him. So that was really good from that perspective.
Mm,
My wife was there. She enjoyed it. She worked in the embassy, so it was a good overall experience. I think the honor of commanding Third Army in combat, pretty notable.
mm-hmm.
But a couple of the favorite jobs I had. Well, one was commanding Alpha Company 112. I would have stayed there forever.
Really?
That's great fun being that.
Mm.
If they would maybe increase my pay as time went on, but if I
Yeah.
couldn't get promoted, but no, that was good. And I enjoyed, I was a XO twice of a battalion and a brigade for about a year and a half. And that was really one of the more enjoyable jobs I had, mostly because I could um, solve problems
Mm,
and fix things. Young guys, young lieutenants trying to struggle through first time on a staff. You got all these requirements, more than you could handle. And they come to see the battalion XO, and you can think about, oh, I've done this before. I can do this. And,
mm,
you can solve problems, make things happen. Same way at brigade, was just a little more sophisticated problems you have. But it was good being in a position where you could solve problems that your staff and your subordinate units were struggling with.
yeah.
So yeah, I found that incredibly enjoyable.
That seems to be a recurring answer to that question.
Hmm.
Positions where people have the ability to assist and help others.
Yeah,
That's a
yeah.
very recurring theme. So,
Mhm.
in the opposite of that, is there a low point? Something that stands out that was maybe a
Yeah,
learning
I think, well, it was
experience?
that whole time at Fort Campbell, I think, or
Hmm.
at least the last year or so of it there. And that was solely to do with the quality of the leadership,
Mm,
battalion, brigade,
mm, okay.
or just incompetence is
Yeah.
what it
Okay.
was. It's hard struggling and through that frustrating and
Yeah. Okay.
everything.
I think I know the answer to this. Would you serve if you could do it over again, and would you do anything different?
Yeah, I would. There are probably a lot of things I would do differently. Um, but yeah, yeah,
Mm,
it's hard to say. I mean,
yeah.
there's things you could wish,
Sure.
but then, it, well, would that have been any different or better? I
Hmm.
don't know. Maybe at the time, I would have not. I would have rather had a maneuver brigade rather than a training brigade.
Hmm.
Um, maybe I wouldn't have worked for General Chrisman then, probably wouldn't have. It was a good experience, and he probably maybe helped propel me, but gave me a good OER and recommendations and behind the scenes stuff. So,
Mm,
so you don't know what you don't know in those regards, but
sure.
yeah.
Okay. And then kind of my last big question, right? What advice would you give to young people entering the military today, or in this next generation?
Yeah, well, I think what gets lost in some of the recruiting efforts and discussions is the notion of taking on an adventure. It's something different, bigger than you. It's exciting, it's demanding. And, if you want to get out and push the limits, than come in the Army or the military. Doesn't really matter. The Army's one of them, but I think um, there's a need for young people to seek real adventure other than winning Mortal Kombat on a video game. You know, there's actual real things going on out there
Yeah,
that are challenging and hard physically and mentally. And you know, if you want that kind of life where you think you might, or you want to force yourself into it, then military service is the way to go.
that's a great answer. Okay, so as I close out here, is there anything you'd like to add that I didn't cover that I didn't ask you about
So
that you'd
you,
like
I
to?
mean, I think you covered my whole 36 years of being in the Army, roughly.
Okay. Well, it was a fascinating story, and I appreciate you sharing it with us.
Sure.
Awesome. Thank you, Paul.